Okay, I think I'm going to kick us off here and get us going. We're really delighted to join you all today. Looks like I have a couple of little technical setup things here to do. I'm Michael Diamond, and I'll introduce myself more fully in a second. Also want to give folks a chance to join the call and see where we are with that. But we'll get underway shortly, and absolutely delighted to welcome all of you here on this really impressive aggregation of alumni and parents and students and faculty and friends across the university today. My name is Michael Diamond. I'm the academic director of what's called the Integrated Marketing and Communications Department within a division at the School of Professional Studies, the Division of Programs in Business. And absolutely delighted, I'll hand it over to my colleague Jennifer to introduce herself.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be talking to you today. I am a clinical assistant professor for public relations and corporate communications at SPS. Prior to this role, I spent over 20 years working in the corporate world as a public relations professional and strategic communicator. Some of my roles included managing Edelman Intelligence, managing Ogilvy Public Relations, and most recently, managing thought leadership for Ogilvy and Mather. My transition into this role was partly motivated by my belief that it's never been a more important time for us to really understand the power of marketing and public relations, and to ensure that we are using that power in this new world for the benefit of the maximum number of people. So it's lovely to talk about this topic with you today.
Excellent. I think Jennifer represents what I hope you'll learn is very much the nature of our faculty, not only DPhil from Oxford, but also, absolutely integral to the life and the growth of our profession over the last 20, 30 years. And, that's really, it couldn't sum up better in an individual, what this program and largely what the school is about. So let's take that quick shift and talk briefly about our agenda for today. We want to sort of revisit the mission of the school because it's newly framed, and I think a powerful one already is beginning to guide our work. We want to talk a bit about the broad drivers of change in marketing and PR. This is a talk today about the transformation of marketing and PR, so it's a legitimate question to talk about what sort of forces might be at work. Well, we then want to talk about what challenges some of these changes, these forces at work have set up for practitioners. Give you some sense, I think, hopefully, of what we do at NYU SPS's programs in integrated marketing and communications, PR, etc., and why I think we're already very much part of the change. But speak a bit more specifically about a center for the transformation of marketing and PR that we are developing and hope some of you will find interesting and want to engage further. So without further ado, let me jump into the mission of the school. Newly framed, we talk here about preparing students to succeed at all stages of their educational and professional journey by importantly providing transformative learning steeped in real-world applications. And this is, I think, exactly what we want to spend our time talking to you about, which is how to link those two things, how to use learning as a transformative experience. We often talk about accelerating that learning curve for students, but also how that speaks to the ways we can help the industry more broadly deal with the transformation of our own practices, yes, which we think are urgent and compelling. And so this is very much a framing for how we see the world moving forward. Broadly speaking, when we look across, a number of different areas, we think there are really three major trends that are driving changes within our industry, within the industries of marketing and PR, and communications more generally, and they are things which are important for practitioners as much as academics to really get their head around, to grapple with, to work through the implications of. It is almost an obvious statement at this point to talk about the impact of data and digital, and in many of the areas on this page, clearly COVID and the impact of this terrible pandemic has sort of heightened or brought into the foreground the intensity and the impact of these changes. But lots of accelerating transformation driven by digital technology itself, fed by data. And we'll go into this in a bit more detail. Reputation and trust, the notion of repositioning a company all around purpose, is absolutely at the heart of what we believe should drive us forward. And Jennifer will talk about that in a lot more detail. And then global growth, and really an acknowledgement among all marketers and communicators that the various influences and inputs and creativity and innovation, et cetera, is coming from markets outside of the US. And really, more broadly, more culturally, this idea of being much more sensitive to different voices and different influences. So if I tackle the first topic and give you a little sense, apologies there, a little sense of where we want to go, and if my technology would comply, that would be wonderful. The idea that we have these new emerging digital platforms and that they are increasingly harnessed to an enormous amount of data is both arguably creepy and also incredibly empowering and encouraging. And we know as marketers and PR professionals that it's going to have a profound impact on the way we need to shape engagement with consumers, the way consumers purchase content, and the way they consume content, frankly, physical or digital. What we teach at the school in our programs in marketing and PR is this very fundamental belief, however, that marketing still needs to be human-centered and data-driven, yes? And while brands have this capability through data to better predict and understand outcomes, it really is not successful unless that's married to a deeper human understanding, an insight, sometimes called qualitative insights, the things you get through ethnography, the things you get through cultural studies, the element that creativity brings to marketing. Yes, those two things need to be joined together, but they are clearly powerfully enhanced. This sort of blend of the math and the magic of marketing and PR are enhanced by a deeper understanding of that data. Alongside that data and the flow of data, though, clearly is this great concern we all share about privacy and brand safety. And brand safety is a term used by advertisers to mean, where is my ad showing up, and is it in an environment that I would condone, or users of my brands and products would be comfortable with. A whole discussion around hate speech, etc. Data and the digital technology has immensely transformed how consumers interact with each other, with their technology, with the content, and products and services they want, how they connect more generally, whether that is them personally or increasingly machines talking to each other in the Internet of Things, how much they can personalize that content and really make the experience very unique to them, and how we as marketers and PR professionals help enable that. And importantly, and certainly on the rise in places you see like the healthcare industry, this notion of the quantitative feedback. Some people talk about all these watches and devices we're wearing and health meters as the idea of there's sort of a quantitative, the quantified self is what people talk about, and we're measuring ourselves and monitoring ourselves all the time. And a lot of that data is of value to you as an individual, but it's clearly of value to marketers and communicators as well. And then more importantly, digital technology and the sort of ethic of software development, etc., is really starting to reshape how we all work, how campaigns are created, how teams come together. And that's going to have an implication for what we teach marketers and what practitioners of marketing and PR will need to engage with. So that's one theme I want to start. We want to start off the conversation with.
So our second theme is reputation and trust. And the role of brands, and especially corporate brands, is changing dramatically. And this has huge implications for all of us, but particularly from our perspective for practitioners and how we educate practitioners in the field. So not so long ago, The role of a corporate brand was to provide good returns for shareholders, run their business ethically, and have product brands or service brands that were high quality, very reliable, and that was good enough. And what we're seeing now is that companies, in particular, are increasingly being expected to become activists in the world, to go beyond their purview. And they're increasingly required to be trusted leaders of positive social, economic, and environmental change. So what are some of the underlying forces to this theme? Well, firstly, there's what we call the democratization of influence. So I've been in the business long enough that I know that when I started, the people in public relations who we needed to influence could be defined as elites. We wanted to influence the media. We wanted to influence regulators and legislators inside the Beltway. We wanted to influence people who were investors in companies. And that's completely changed with the rise of social media, the rise of the internet. Now we see that the scope of influence is significantly expanded. And virtually anyone with a Facebook account or a Twitter feed can create influence. So what that means is that brands in general, but particularly corporate brands who were very used to just delivering, a standard set of qualities to a limited number of elite groups, are now having to engage and expand their engagement, and also to engage in far more authentic and meaningful ways. So this is crucially important for how companies think about their identity in the world. What we're also seeing, secondly, is that philanthropy has become responsibility and is now becoming activism. So what do we mean by that? Well, not so long ago, very big, powerful companies would start foundations, would write very big checks to philanthropic causes, and considered their contribution to society was made. Well, that changed. And what we've seen over the past 20 years is companies are starting to evolve towards responsibility, which basically, for most of them, means a responsibility for their footprint in the world. So all the ways in which they touch the world, from how the employees are treated, how they source their raw materials, what is the climate impact of their supply chain, how do they ensure the safety of their products and services. So this notion of corporate responsibility has really expanded, and we can see there are very few companies in the Fortune 500 who don't have sustainability programs, for example, focused on their own operations and activities. However, it's more than that, because what we're seeing now is that activism is starting to evolve out of this responsibility. And what activism primarily consists of is companies looking beyond their footprint to broader issues that are important to society, to their customers, to their shareholders, and starting to become advocates and activists for these broader issues. So along with these first two things is emerging the evolution of what we call the corporate voice. So, there was a time when big companies like Unilever were happy to sit behind their products, like Dove, and let the product speak. But now what is happening is a company like Unilever is starting to develop a very vocal corporate voice that is talking not just to elite groups, but building this diverse, global, highly inclusive and supportive ecosystem for itself across all sorts of media, across all sorts of markets. And so what these things have resulted in is the CMOs, the chief marketing officers, and the chief communications officers inside of companies and at agencies who work for companies, they're having to adjust what their role is because of all the increased demands on brands and specifically corporate brands. So what they're needing to do is step up to become what we call purpose-led initiators of change. They are the voice of where the company should be in the world, and to help drive that company's transition towards what we call humanized growth, which is growth for good. So this is the second theme, and it's not going away anytime soon.
Excellent. Well, I think that's it's wonderful, obviously, to see each of these themes related to each other, and the attempt is to separate them for the purposes of discussion. But I think you already begin to make some of those connections yourself. The third theme is around global markets and global growth, and it's obviously been true for a long time that from an American perspective, at least, exporting outside the US has been a significant opportunity for growth. But, our sophistication as exporters has obviously developed significantly. And this is a 10, 20, 30-year plus story in which an understanding about investing in local markets, working with and helping to develop local brands and local initiatives is as important as simply exporting US product. But I think the story has actually shifted again now. It's not so much about where the US stands. It's actually about these markets that have grown very strongly with rising middle classes, lots of purchasing power, absolute large-scale size of population, integration of technology. We'll talk through each one of those things, but they now themselves are the sources of inspiration and creativity and innovation. And that's what we teach at NYU in our classes. The examples and the case studies we use are as likely to be drawn from a marketing campaign or a PR campaign in China or Japan or Africa, et cetera, as they are from the US. Yes, that is part of what we're trying to engender, that broader discussion around the source of innovation and creativity. So I think a couple of highlights that most practitioners would and academics would probably identify as big levers or points of inflection. Number one is this deep integration of mobile. Mobile's used even more so outside the US as a currency, a form of communication, and clearly a platform for community. In sub-Saharan Africa alone, it's projected there'll be an additional 45 million smartphone users over the next 4 to 5 years. Yeah, so 45 million more people who have some of that level of interactivity and technology-enabled communications, commerce, etc. And think about all the extraordinarily wonderful, healthy things we can do with that, along with the commercial applications for that kind of penetration and development. Outside of the US, the more non-traditional forms of commerce, not just e-commerce, have been developed. AI-enabled technology, as we read in the papers every day, is significantly on the rise, especially in Asian markets. I think between Microsoft and Tencent alone, they probably each have 500 million active users of their sort of AI-enabled chatbots. People spend hours with them, young people particularly, sources of inspiration, ways to navigate to commerce, things like that. The delivery to homes by automated bots, the rise of robots. I mean, these things are not the science fiction any longer. They are influencing how consumers interact with services and products, how they get information, how they learn about brands, etc. So marketers and PR communicators more generally really need to understand this world and interact with this world in a way that draws on potentially new sets of skills. And clearly, the Chinese and Asian markets specifically are markets which many of us look towards for some of this innovation and growth, and are themselves, building businesses of enormous scale and influence and importance. But I think, like all things in marketing and PR, we celebrate the tensions as much as the absolutes. Yeah. So with every force, there's some kind of countervailing force or concern or pressure, etc. and this balance between the rise of global markets or the rise of global brands has definitely been moderated, if that's the right word, by the rise too of a real resurgent interest in local tastes, in local culture, in local opportunities. The local craft beer is often the easiest one to talk about, or even the local honey and the local food, etc., the local perfume. There's lots of sort of products and services indeed that are being repositioned around the nature of their geography, where they come from, their rootedness in the local community, etc. But you know, this local, national, global debate extends even to things that feel like they don't really have a geography, like data. And if you watch this space carefully, you'll see lots of national governments now thinking about their data as a local or a national asset, and not something that necessarily should be floating around the internet shared with global companies. So, you know, this tension about how to maximize global opportunity and celebrate local, you know, local origin, local product, local culture, etc., is one of the more interesting aspects that we as marketers are tracking. So, you know, that's three broad trends, and I want to sort of pass this baton back to my colleague Jennifer, sort of to take us into a discussion a little bit about you know, sorry, that's the second of the trends. So talk about you know, a third very sort of powerful movement that's going on here.
Yeah, so thanks, Michael. You know, so we see simply what we did here, just to illustrate how powerful these three trends are, is we just pulled a few headlines from the last week out of the paper. We didn't cherry pick them especially. And what we can see is these trends manifesting immediately in the futures and the behaviors of major global companies. So, you know, up at the top, we see how companies like Zappos and Tom's of Maine, you know, have always stuck with their principles, very strong principles of getting and giving. And the fact is, these are turning out to be competitive assets to them. Starbucks, you know, has always had a very powerful purpose-driven intent. And that is starting to turn out to have been not just the right thing to do, but very savvy in terms of its market valuation, in terms of confidence that people have in its future in the world. We pulled Land O'Lakes here because this was a company, you know, it's a farmer's co-op. It's also a major supplier of dairy products, and it's also a feed supplier. During the pandemic, Land O'Lakes re-engineered their entire supply chain to prevent their farmers from having to trash all this milk into the fields, to ensure that the milk made it to the stores, to you and me. This is a company stepping up and making sure that the food supply chain is working. That's a big move for an individual company, right? And then, you know, down at the bottom, you know, we can talk about the woes of the tech companies for hours. But what's important here, I think, to highlight is, you know, Apple's new iPhone 12, fantastic, but this decision not to have chargers, this idea of not being aware of what their Generation Z and their younger millennials really care about, which is the climate and the future of the planet, and not factoring that into their marketing strategy. And then obviously, Huawei, all the issues at a global level that Huawei is having in the United States might seem like a windfall for Apple and Samsung, but actually we're looking at the next wave of big Chinese telecommunications product companies coming in. So the global dynamic that has to be navigated, the political tensions, the trade issues, all of these things require brands to have this very comprehensive reputational identity so that they can command trust and authority in all these different areas of their existence. And that's what arts practitioners at our school are having to learn how to manage. And, you know, if we look a little bit more deeply at that, what is demanded of practitioners today in marketing and PR and corporate communications? You know, and basically, we now have to do a whole lot more than what we used to have to do. So when I first started in this discipline, the marketers were worried about growth and sales, and the PR people were worried about managing elite influencers. And now the skill set is so much broader. We have to master all these new skills because we're dealing with a globalized, data-driven, and an activist environment where our brands are living. And 4 of them that we wanted to highlight this morning with you. The first is speak truth to power. And what do we mean by that? Well, you know, there was a time when there was no place for communicators in the boardroom or in the C-suite. Communicators were regarded as, you know, people who spoke about whatever business strategy was. And now what we're finding is that business strategy must take into account expertise in markets, in consumers, in how brands are built, in how social and cultural forces impact companies and what they do in the world. And so it's important that practitioners in our field are able to have the authority and the expertise to function at a C-suite level. And that's what we're trying to train them to do. The second is what we call the capacity to unify the communications ecosystem. So, you know, if any of you watching are practitioners, you may know that everyone used to have a lane, right? The PR people had the PR lane, they were the marketing guys, they were the advertising folks, and the communications between those different functions were weak at best and sometimes conflictual. Well, there's no time or space for that because we are talking to an integrated world. We are talking to people who we touch in multiple ways in their lives, not just through our products. And so practitioners have to learn how to integrate these issues, all the different populations, all the different stories around the brand, and all the different things that are impacting the brand into one whole and work with each other across discipline at a cross-disciplinary level. The 4th thing is the skill to build responsible and thriving brands. So this is very, very important because survey after survey shows people want companies to make money. People want brands to be successful. They also want them to do good. And so it's important for practitioners to be able to help brands to lean into those purpose-driven actions, but to also understand which purpose-driven actions are going to do the greatest good and ensure that the company itself builds its own resilience and success. So, you know, you've heard the phrase doing well by doing good. It's in that territory, but it is a very subtle, strategic line to draw. And we have to be able to operate on both sides. We have to protect the brands we work for, and we have to protect the environment that those brands are impacting. And then finally, you know, we called it holding the ethical line. And, you know, Michael has spoken about the rise of big tech and big data. And we all know that along with that has come enormous power of influence to close people's minds as well as open them. Right? And we've seen it again and again, and we continue to see it. So practitioners have to be able to identify new ethical issues as they arise, often technology and data-driven issues, and be able to hold fast to core principles of transparency and truth-telling. So this is our goal as we move forward with our department at SPS.
So I think it's a wonderful transition to talk a little bit about what we're doing at NYU. And we'll probably take another 10, 15 minutes at most to talk through what's actually going on, how we're responding to some of these things. And then we'll leave a good 10, 15 minutes for questions. And I can see a number of questions coming in to the chat. So we encourage you to put questions into, I think it's what's called the GTR chat, if I get that right, but you should see a chat window where you can submit questions, and we have that chat being monitored, and so hopefully your questions can get picked up and we'll be as responsive as we can. So NYU School of Professional Studies, we would argue, given those trends that Jennifer and I just reviewed, is actually very well placed to equip our leaders, our future leaders, with the kind of skills and insights that they're going to need to contribute, and also that we as a broader faculty of a community of faculty and practitioners can make a really valuable contribution and generate valuable research that informs the field more generally about both the trends, what's going on, how to respond, best practice, etc. And when we step back and look at that a little bit, I think we would argue the reason we're in a unique position, and all of you who are affiliated broadly, you're all now members of the family, so to speak, as NYU alums and parents and students even. The reason why we think we are very well positioned is we start with this integrated approach. So you see on this call, we probably hate to admit it, but between us, 50 plus years of professional experience in PR and marketing, and we are looking at all of the opportunities to really integrate those things, to think about how what are ultimately called chief communications officers and their whole organization, and chief marketing officers, how those two roles and teams integrate better, and frankly how all of it is put to this idea of purpose and ethics, or driving growth more generally, etc. So this is a very critical thing for us, and we may talk about that a bit more, about how to approach this as an integrated in an integrated fashion. Bottom left, if we think about New York City, and while I recognize that many of us cannot be together in person in New York City, and are indeed, perhaps even viewing this webinar itself from around the world, or later recorded versions of this, we still, NYU beats, the very heart of NYU right there in Washington Square, but very heart of NYU beats with the media and marketing and communications and increasingly entertainment capital of the US, at least, being in New York. And one of the things that's enabled us to do, and continues to enable us to do, is really attract leading practitioners in the field, because they're right there, they are our community. And that's a very important and valuable thing for our students. I think that connection to a place, the room where it happens, so to speak. And then finally, excuse me, on the right-hand side, we really celebrate and are proud of the fact that we are a highly diverse and global community of both faculty and students. And I'll give you some broader sense of that in a minute. And I think, NYU, I think this is more broadly true of, is an extraordinary place for that level of diversity and that sort of passion and energy and creativity that comes from bringing people from all around the world together to solve problems, to explore new issues, etc. So these are very powerful attributes to carry us into a world where we are trying to educate and equip future leaders of marketing and PR, etc. So to talk a little bit more about the programs, particularly at the School of Professional Studies, we have about 1,300 graduate students. So right now, across our two programs, we have about 1,300 graduate students enrolled. We also have what are called continuing education or non-credit programs, which many of you may have participated in. And there's typically around another 500 or 600 of those students active at the school during an academic year. But the core of these two master's programs, we run one in marketing and one in PR, about 1,300 students. They are taught, over the course of 2, 3, 4 semesters by about 250 practitioners and academics. And then more broadly, we have an active community of almost 4,000 alumni. So, I think you would argue in the field of marketing and PR, this is a community of real scale and potentially one of the largest communities around an academic institution or an academic program that's dedicated solely to marketing and PR. 4 full-time faculty for all of that activity, Jennifer among them. Dr. Bujicic is a wonderful researcher in the areas of travel and tourism and hospitality, and also pricing and revenue management, and brings in a lot of science and data to our deliberations. Dr. Gaor, who is a very eminent editor of academic journals, chair of marketing departments around the world, who's a member of our faculty as well, along with Jennifer and I, who have a slightly more practitioner bent. I guess I didn't say at the beginning, but I spent 20 years working at Time Warner. I left as the acting chief marketing officer there for the cable division, and held positions in international growth and digital strategy and long-range planning, etc. So very much steeped in that world, a world that included some time in consulting, etc. Our adjunct faculty, you know, probably I'm estimating here about 10% have PhDs. Almost every single one of them has a master's degree, you know, from many distinguished academic institutions. And importantly for us, they're drawn from the leadership, the very leadership of these PR associations, agencies, brands, PR and marketing, you know, organizations. And generally we're attracting, in many cases, C-suite level people, EVP level people, SVPs, etc. Yes, you need obviously some wisdom and experience along with pedagogy to be an effective teacher. And we spend a lot of our time, have invested a lot of our time, and perhaps there are people on the this call themselves who are interested in becoming an adjunct and teaching. You should definitely get in touch with me. But we spend a lot of our time helping practitioners translate their skills and knowledge into something that can be taught and inculcated. It's about 77% full-time, about 80% of the students, as you can see, are in this 21 to 25 age range. Median age is around 24, and that's, I think, reflective of a lot of tertiary graduate school education. It used to be something that people did in their early to mid 30s. It's now done by people a lot younger, typically. As I said, a very international crowd, about 84%. And of our domestic base, it's roughly 50%, you know, who declare a race or ethnicity are white, and others Black, Hispanic, Pacific Islander, Asian, etc. So, you know, that's an area where we continue to really try to work and broaden, you know, both the representation and the engagement and the sense of belonging among our student body. But among our domestic students, it's about 50-50. We're also a very engaged community in terms of corporate and professional life. You know, on the left-hand side, I've just pulled some logos of a few of the major sort of industry associations, which we as faculty are involved in. Had a privilege of representing the school at Cannes, the big festival advertising, in their, you know, inaugural Educators Summit. One of the pioneers, I guess. We're members of a wonderful institute which is all around building humanized growth and teaching a set of more senior marketers about how to drive growth in companies in a humanized way. It's the Institute for Real Growth. We were really honored to be, you know, we were basically named in the top 5 PR programs in the whole country as a finalist in the PR Week Awards. I was active delegate to the CMO Growth Council. We have the current president and chair, I think, of the PR Council as one of our faculty, etc. So very engaged. That creates enormous opportunities for our students. It also gives us, you know, a constant sort of idea of what's going on, what's relevant, what's important, what's on the mind of CMOs and CCOs and their suite and their set of colleagues. We're also, as a group, writing books. I didn't put the published academic journal articles in here, but there are several of those too. Some wonderful books that just came out, frankly, in the last year or so by faculty around rhetoric and this notion of, you know, rhetoric and political speech, this notion of conscious marketing, which is very aligned with the idea of stakeholder capitalism or putting purpose to profits, etc. Practical books like How to Succeed in a PR Agency, and very thoughtful, you know, sort of provocative books about the future of the industry. It's worth noting for those who are historians that almost 100 years ago, the very first course in PR anywhere in a university was taught at NYU by a man who's become famous as the father, quote unquote, of PR, called Ed Bernays. And our program in marketing, while that discipline is just as old, our formal program in marketing is almost 25 years old. So, you know, we have a good track record, I would argue, across the field. So what are we going to do with that? Where are we going? And our goal really is to build out now a center where scholars and practitioners and students all around can come together and really work together on these problems of how to transform marketing and PR. And that center would be grounded in a belief, and you've probably heard these themes now, and they should resonate, that marketing and PR is a human-centered and data-driven activity. Yes, that in essence, marketing and PR is, as a good colleague of ours, Tom Kennan, likes to say, it's about the transformation of human insights into business value. You know, that's what we spend our time obsessing and trying to do if we're doing it well. But we also know that in order to be effective, both marketing and PR must put this idea of purpose and ethics at the very center of both the strategy, you know, at the high level, and also the tactical level of what they do, what shows up in campaigns. And to be candid, you know, our own mission, our own purpose is this belief that marketing and PR must have a role to play in building a just, equitable, and sustainable society and economy. Yes, that we can be this force for good that Jennifer talked about. So our goals in the near term are really to accelerate that connection between what we sometimes call the intent and the impact of the practice. You know, really help marketers and PR professionals navigate that space between what they probably want to do, what they feel morally compelled to do, and then how to do that in ways that generate growth and value for their host companies as well. We're a learning institution, so we're very much about, you know, how to transform those learning experiences. And we're also very much, you know, wedded to the world of practice and integrating with companies. And Jennifer will talk a little bit more about this sort of broad, you know, set of constituencies that we serve in a second. And very importantly, we you know, it's a core foundational commitment that we all have made, is to build a diverse, supportive, and inclusive community. And we're doing that in many ways around us, you know, who teaches in classrooms, where we recruit our students from, what conversations do we have, what voices are heard. So these are very critical things for us. I'll hand this back over to Jennifer. I think after this slide, we'll actually pause. We'll have time for some Q&A, a good, you know, solid 15 minutes. And we welcome any comments. Apologies that it's sort of mediated through this chat, but I think our colleagues who are monitoring the chat are doing a good job of picking up those topics, and we'll come back to that in a second. So.
Great. Thank you, Michael. So the center itself, in our vision for it, will be resting on three interconnected pillars or efforts. The first is obviously educational programs. So we are an educational institution. Our job is to cultivate professional skills that would be put into action out in the world. And the kinds of educational programs that we intend to develop around and for this center include things like a program in artificial intelligence, modeling and technology, and ethics, right? For marketing and PR. What is the interface between these things in our modern world? So trying to ensure that the topics that we're looking at are extremely relevant and on point for the challenges that professionals are facing today. We also are looking at industry solutions and engagement. And this is a crucial part of our existence at SPS, is that our interface, our applied interface with business is so strong. So we envisage this pillar being about applied practices that we take into the field in partnership with companies. And we test out how are they working. We try to create activation around them. And an example could be, you know, developing and piloting a module for in-house training of marketers and communicators in building better collaborations. So there are a lot of companies right now whose in-house communicators are not well integrated. And how can we find a way of optimizing that integration for the benefit of those companies? The third pillar is applied research initiatives. This is our scholarship, right? This is our academic studies. This is the original research that is going to be part of this process. You know, and an example of this could be, you know, an analysis of what really is the current role of chief communications officers and chief marketing officers in steering companies towards a more expansive and responsible presence in the world. And what are the the challenges they face, what are the best practices that are used. We need to know these things. We could also, for example, in applied research, look at the role of employee engagement in developing and activating corporate initiatives. So there's a lot of activity within the pillars, but it's the intersection of the pillars that is also very important. So between our educational programs and our applied industry solutions and engagement is enormous opportunity for our students to engage with industry, to develop their skills. And it's an opportunity for industry to look at new talent coming up, potential hires, and bring those people over into their businesses. At the intersection of educational programs and applied research initiatives, we see that students are given really sophisticated professional experience in how to function in the world. And then between applied research and industry solutions, here's our opportunity to really advance theory and practice, because we're coming up with the theory and we're trying it out in the real world, we're pressure testing it, and what is the outcome of that? And in the very center is thought leadership. And what that really means for us is that we are intending to develop expertise and authority in this space so that we can share our understandings and our learnings with students, with the broader academic community, but particularly with the corporate world that we have such a strong relationship with, so that we can go forward building against our ethical intentions and helping companies function in a more purpose-driven way in the world.
Fantastic. I think both Jennifer and I come out of the professional services worlds, and we never miss an opportunity for a Venn diagram or some such other chart. So, apologize to those of you who are now weary of such techniques. But anyway, this is hopefully given you all a nice sort of taste of both what we as two reflective practitioners and academics in the space of marketing and PR see as some of the bigger trends and themes, and also a sense of how that urgency translates into what we do at the School of Professional Studies. And I want to invite some questions. I want to make one comment, which is, as the father of three kids, one fully through university, one at university, one about to go. You're probably also asking is, when students come through your programs, do they end up with jobs? Is this actually working in terms of employment? And I want to guarantee you that, we survey this every single year, and regularly between 95% and 100% of our graduate students that respond are working within 6 months, or are in employment within 6 months of leaving the school. So, I think with respect to the more sort of mundane things of life, we also have a very good track record in preparing our students to be employed. So on that slightly mercenary or meretricious note, I'll switch over to hopefully some more broad questions about trends and themes. So let me just switch pages here. Hopefully you can see that. To the right, and please don't be anchored in this if you want to go somewhere else, but this is just a very brief summary of what we covered with you, and I won't go through it again, but it may be that some of these comments remind you or trigger you to ask a question that you had. So let me start at least, and I'll see if I can handle these. We have roughly 10 to 12 minutes. I think we can pick off a number of them. I might punt some to Jennifer as well. So we had a question early on about the sort of local and global, at least a comment, saying how important it was to think about reframing that. And I'm pleased that that idea resonates. I think it's an important area to tap, probably an important area for some research. Indeed, Dr. Gao has been working on a very interesting paper about a local coffee company in China and its sort of battle with Starbucks. So, we'll see some of that work coming out. Also, it was a question, I guess, around the impact that data and digital are having from the standpoint of B2B marketing. my thoughts are many of the trends we've described are valid and relevant. If anything, many B2B marketers or B2B industry players have adopted some of this digital technology faster and integrated it deeper into their operations. I spent actually an afternoon talking to one of our faculty who's been advising both the Texas government and the University of Yale on how to automate all of their sort of COVID responses and PPE, collections, etc. And it's all built around the digitization of the things they're doing. In the space of B2B, and we've had some great conversations with McKinsey around this. Is this idea of the Internet of Things becomes an enormous enabler for B2B players to, in some senses, activate their relationships with each other, but even potentially to leapfrog into some of the consumer relationships. So, I think digital is as significant and data clearly a disruptor and a force for transformation in B2B markets as it is in consumer markets. I'm not sure, Jennifer, if you have anything to add there, maybe from a PR perspective. B2B PR has been somewhat different, arguably. I don't.
Yeah, well, it has. But what I will say is that what has happened with data and digital is that the touch points available to PR folks or communicators with B2B customers have become far more extensive. So there's a much more of an opportunity from a brand building, reputational point of view to touch these folks, but to also reach them in ways that are meaningful to them. Maybe not directly related to the product transaction, but related to something else that they care about.
We had a question too about, make sure I'm not mute. We had a question too about, a lot of what we're talking in this notion of holistic marketing, specifically around the pandemic. And obviously, COVID-19 and the coronavirus has been, just an awful thing from a personal human level. And many marketers, I think it's fair to say, many brands and companies generally have tried to be clear, and we hope have lived their promise that they're putting the health and safety of their employees and their consumers first. But they are also asking these questions about what has changed. Has anything changed fundamentally in consumer behavior about, with the impact of COVID-19? Early on, and I think this may still be true, many people were saying it's very hard to read any kind of results from a survey about behavior during this period, because largely a lot of our behavior was compelled upon us. Yes, we weren't choosing to stay home per se. We were asked to stay home. We weren't choosing not to eat out. We were told not to eat out. So it's very difficult to measure, to take the behavior of a group of people that's happening because they're compelled to act in a certain way and extrapolate that. But clearly, after a period of time, some of these things become habit forming, and what we're all looking to is, and I encourage you to spend some time at 10 o'clock with my colleague, Anna Tavis, who's talking about the future of work and how some of this is being reshaped. But I think that we're all looking for what are the broader, longer term impacts of COVID-19. The question specifically was about basically, should we go broad, with big brand advertising, or should we be more targeted? I think the general wisdom right now, in fact, I saw a headline a day or two ago, is that this is not a time to sell, which I think what people mean is, this is not a time to go sort of very, very hard into, very tough, targeted, direct sales messages. That brands probably need to spend a bit more time at the level that Jennifer was talking about, the level of trust and reputation, and establishing, not just through words, but obviously importantly through deeds and acts, that they do take their position in society. Importantly, that they recognize this is a moment in time in which we all need to be flexible, and you see a lot of those themes, I think, showing up in marketing and advertising. Clearly it's hard to get it right, to do it well. Some brands have been accused of what's called woke washing and, simply jumping on the bandwagon. But I think in general, the answer to your question is that this is a time, I think, for brands to think, longer, deeper, harder about their purpose and their role in society. But they're also part of the solution of regenerating growth in the economy and getting it restarted, and more importantly, making sure that their services and products can be delivered in ways that are accessible, to communities that are now being governed by different forces. So I think you've seen a lot of creativity in that space. But we had a question about actually the experience in class at NYU around teaching, and whether we've gone all virtual. We offer a blend, and we've tried to do this, of both physically in-person classes for those who want to attend, as well as online and virtual learning. I think the data suggests that at the graduate level, online learning, async learning can be a very healthy experience. Our students tend to be a little bit more mature than a typical sort of college campus undergraduate experience, and they have more, sort of finite and specific reasons for being at graduate school. As you saw, 25% roughly are part-time, which means they're working. So to some extent, using online platforms has been a positive thing for students. It's enabled us to invest very heavily in our pedagogy, sort of revisit how we teach, how we're effective, reintegrate digital technology in our teaching, etc. But we've committed to sort of maintain a blend and provide in-person classes where that's needed and wanted, and mostly what's called remote sync classes otherwise. So virtual but real-time exchanges with a professor and other students. Jennifer, maybe you want to offer some perspective about teaching in that environment. You're one of our many distinguished faculty doing that. So.
Yeah, all my classes are blended, which means I am in person in the classroom during the week. And if students wish to be in person, we are perfectly socially distanced. Everyone is masked and incredibly respectful. The protocols are remarkable. I will say this, NYU has taken enormous responsibility for everybody's health and safety. So the students who really benefit from an in-person experience in the classroom can have that. At the same time, there are students who Zoom in to my live class, and that is better for them for a whole variety of reasons. But we're all doing very well, actually. I think it's turned out to be, under the circumstances, still an extremely rich learning environment.
One of our very attentive listeners sent a question asking me why I left the PRSA off my list, and I feel like that moment at the Oscars where you forgot to thank somebody. But obviously, when I was talking about the broader set of activities we as a community are engaged in, I had a selective list of organizations. The PRSA, and for those of you who don't know, the Public Relations Society of America, is probably the largest organization, professional organization that represents PR practitioners and has a huge global conference each year typically. We're very much part of that. We actually host the Tri-State Conference at most years at our facilities in NYU, and I myself and a number of other faculty speak down there. So shout out to the PRSA as well. So any other questions? I think we covered a number of themes, and I'm also conscious that folks need to transition probably over to another exciting event. As I said, for those of you who want to stay with SPS, I believe, if I'm not incorrect, at 10, Anna Tavis is up. And she's always a tremendous and wonderfully engaging speaker, so I encourage you to talk to her. If you want to reach out to us, let me put this slide up, which is more generally about the network, this wonderful network, and many of you may know Sonal Pandey at the school, but there are other members of our alumni relations team and the university's alumni relations team who can help keep you connected and stay connected. But these are some of the ways you could do that, electronically via the different platforms, and certainly via these platforms you can find me. I think both Jennifer and I are active on these platforms. And I welcome any and all comments and feedback, and love to see you, your relatives, your friends, etc., in our classrooms as faculty, students, engaged parents and alumni. We very much welcome that broad community and want to see as much engagement as we can. So, all right, I think I'm going to sign off at this point, or at least leave this up and allow you guys to gather your thoughts, drink a cup of coffee. And too bad we weren't able to do this in person. It would have been absolutely tremendous to hang out and get your feedback, but find some electronic means of getting hold of us, including these links attached here, and we'd be happy to engage.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure, everyone. Have a wonderful day. It's been a real pleasure, everyone. Have a wonderful day.